Big movie of the week as far as all the hype and the publicity and the posters and the interviews are concerned. 12 Years a Slave, which is out this week. Mark, what did you think?
Well, hype, publicity, and but also awards. I mean, the interesting thing is I saw 12 Years a Slave when it played at the London Film Festival, and as you know, since then it's been the front runner in the awards nominations at the BAFTAs. Numerically, 12 Years a Slave got one less nomination than Gravity, but there was a simple reason for that, which was that it wasn't in the best British film category, which Gravity did get nominated for because it was all shot here. So actually, I think numerically it's the same. And if you include Lupita Nyong'o's Rising Star nomination, in fact, it does have the same amount. The general feeling is that it's got a very good chance of sweeping the board at the best film. I mean, it's kind of head-to-head battle between, on the one hand, 12 Years a Slave, and on the other hand, Gravity. And it's an extraordinary piece of work. Third feature film by Steve McQueen, brilliant British artist turned filmmaker, based on the memoir of Solomon Northup, who was a man, a carpenter, family man, talented musician, living in New York State in 1841, was kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South, something which apparently was a shockingly common occurrence. And what happens is he's stripped of his identity, stripped of his name, given a new name called Platt. First finds himself on a plantation owned by Benedict Cumberbatch, who seems comparatively benign, despite the fact that he is, of course, a slave owner, and then is later sold on to Epps, played by Michael Fassbender, who is this broiling sort of cauldron of psychotic rage, made all the worse by the fact that he has these desires for Patsy, who's one of the fellow slaves, which kind of seem to be driving him to acts of uncontrollable cruelty. The key thing is, at the beginning of the story, you meet Solomon having effectively been stripped of his former life and told that this is what his future now is. Here's a clip.
Well, boy, how you feel now?
My name is Solomon Northup. I'm a free man, a resident of Saratoga, New York, the residence of my wife and children who are equally free, and you have no right whatsoever to detain me.
You're not any free
And
man.
I promise you upon my liberation, I will have satisfaction for this wrong.
Resolve this. Produce your papers. You're no free man. And you ain't from Saratoga. You're from Georgia. You ain't a free man. You're nothing but a Georgia runaway.
Now, the interesting thing with the film, as with the memoir, is that the title tells you, there's going to be 12 years of this. And when the memoir was first published, it did actually become something of a bestseller and then seemed to sort of drop off the radar. When I interviewed Steve McQueen about it around the time of the London Film Festival, and I said, I was kind of ashamed that I hadn't read it. He said, because the interesting thing is, why isn't this as well known as, for example, The Diary of Anne Frank? Because it's an extraordinary account from, right in the middle of the belly of the beast, written, the first-person account of this absolutely extraordinary first-person account of slavery. And I think that the film succeeds on a number of levels. The first is, from a performance level, Chiwetel Ejiofor is magnificent. It's a very, very difficult role, and apparently when he was first offered it, he wasn't sure that he wanted to take it. He for some reason, he was just uncertain about taking it on. And so much of what he does is, he's a brilliant actor. He's incredibly versatile. You look, he's at comedy, he's done science fiction, he's done, he's done all these different things. But in the case of this particular film, he has to play this character who goes from at the beginning, he's got this family life, and then he's suddenly in this awful pit of degradation. And the only way that his character can survive is essentially to contain his rage, to pretend that he's illiterate, because he can't let them know that he is literate, because that will just get him into trouble and into danger. And so much of what he does is not to do with what he says, it's to do with the way he stands. His stance completely changes during the movie, from the way we see him at the beginning of the film, and then as these awful events engulf him. So an awful lot of what he does is physical, and I think it's a brilliant performance. And I have to say, my money would be on him winning Best Actor, both at the BAFTAs and I hope at the Oscars. It's stupendous. What's equally impressive on the performance level is that you have people like Michael Fassbender, whose portrayal of Epps is, Epps is this really, really psychotic character. Benedict Cumberbatch, as I said, with this character who's kind of appears to be somewhat benign, but of course is involved in this, this appalling slavery. And then Lupita Nyong'o, who is a total newcomer, who plays Patsy, who has got a very, very important role in the film. And it's very difficult, and she has this extraordinary range that she has to play. And I had not seen her before. She's a screen newcomer. And you just go, blimey, that is really something incredible. Seeing, I guarantee you, if you whatever you think of the film, and I think you'll love it, although it's very tough, you just think that's breathtaking. Now, those performances don't come out of nowhere, and it's very important to understand that what Steve McQueen, who in the past has, I think, by some critics, been thought of as somebody who has a style, he always talks about form and content being very, very closely aligned, but people will talk about, for example, in the case of Hunger, there's that long, I think it's like 17 minutes, in which there's a conversation between the prisoner and the priest. There's that long sequence in Shame, in which we get a song which plays out over a single long take. And people have talked about his style because he was a Turner Prize winning artist. In the case of 12 Years a Slave, what's most impressive about it is its storytelling. It is a brilliant piece of storytelling, screenplay by John Ridley. It tells the story in a way which is just pitched right. You're in there right from the beginning of it. You completely believe in all these characters, and you are, on the one hand, overwhelmed by the horror and the enormity of it. And there are sequences in it that are, quite rightly so, really, really hard to watch. I mean, a lot of people, I think, will make comparisons with Django Unchained, and we are in a completely different territory here. I mean, the way Quentin Tarantino's entire register is exploitational. That's not necessarily a criticism. It's only Quentin Tarantino makes exploitation movies. There are many exploitation movies that I like, but we are in a totally different register here. The pain, the suffering here is real in a way that it never is in Quentin Tarantino's movies. There's also, all the way through the film, an extraordinary use of music, of song. The way in which song works as a kind of underlying theme. Of course, Northup himself is a musician. This is how he originally is kidnapped, because he's asked to go on tour with these other musicians, and then he ends up being kidnapped. So there is a thread that plays all the way through, which is to do with the music, which is to do with song, which is to do with the sound of the atmosphere. But the most important thing about it is you end up watching it, and it's a really important story in as much as it's a story about slavery. It's a story about man's inhumanity to man. It's a first-hand account that you kind of think exactly as Steve McQueen said. Why haven't we all read this along with the Diary of Anne Frank? I'm sure there are many people out there who have read it, but I mean many who haven't. And what it does is it pitches it just right, that you're completely engulfed in the drama. You're completely, you understand the characters. And he does another interesting thing as well, which is that all the characters are handled even-handedly. Even the characters who are involved in the most appalling, violence and slave training, you kind of feel that they're three-dimensional. It's not just the Benedict Cumberbatch character who's kind of on the outside sort of nice. Or, even the Fassbender character, when I was interviewed him on stage, he said, because the way you have to get into it, you have to understand what's going on in his head. So none of the characters are portrayed as just singly two-dimensional. And then in the centre of it all, you have Chiwetel Ejiofor, and the camera spends so much time just literally looking at his face. I mean, when people are talking about lingering shots, it's just looking at his face, and so much of what's happening is to do with the way in which he's reacting. The cinematography beautifully captures that strange thing in the landscape, that there's beauty and horror coexisting. There's one sequence which is almost like a Terrence Malick movie. It's almost like something like Thin Red Line, in which there's a terrible thing going on, but the rest of life is kind of carrying on by the side of it. I came out the other end of it feeling, on the one hand, completely drained, because it is it's an overwhelming film to watch. It's important and serious and all the rest of it. But the most important thing about it is that it's a filmmaker doing that thing, using cinema, for the highest possible means, which is to tell a story which is truthful and important and somehow ennobling, because it is a story that is looking fairly recent history. I mean, 1841. This is fairly recent history, full in the face. And just riding that line about just how much the audience take. As I said, there were certain sequences in it in which I looked away, and I think that's a perfectly fine response, and that is not a criticism. But there is so much in there that's, in a strange way, I mean, he understands the language of cinema. And if critics in the past have perhaps complained that what he had was style rather than necessarily substance, and that's not a criticism that I agree with, incidentally, you look at this and you go, that's storytelling. That is storytelling.